Okay, looks like we're live here. Sorry about that. If you guys were waiting around, hopefully you can hear me okay. We're doing something a little different today. We're live streaming, but I'm live streaming from the car. And so I hope that the audio will keep up with it. I think it'll be okay. But um, if you're on the chat and are hearing everything okay or not hearing everything okay, you could just let us know in the comments. But I wanted to introduce you a little bit to what's going on today. So, in our Discord community, I don't know, it was yesterday or whatever, someone posted a video of Christopher West reacting, as you might expect, to a video by, let's say, a non Christian or at least non Catholic doctor. I believe she's a urologist who has a pretty large YouTube channel. I'm very envious of her YouTube channel. She's got, I think she's got over 1 million subscribers. But he purported to react to her video on masturbation, and I thought he did. I did not think he was very fair in the clips that he took of her video. And so what I want to do is react to his reaction, but in order, sort of in fairness to everybody, we're going to play her video first, which I believe is around 7 minutes or so. And then we'll play his reaction video, which is longer. It's about 15 minutes. I may stop and go in his video, but I think it's really important that you actually get a chance to listen to the entirety of her video before you hear his reactions, because there's significant parts that he leaves out. And I think, and again, I think it's really important to understand she's not attempting to come at this from a Christian or Catholic perspective. She's coming at it from a pure, let's say, scientific or biological perspective. At least she thinks she is. And so I think we just need to understand that when we're listening to her video. So, with that in mind, Andy, why don't you go ahead and cue up her video? And I'm pretty much just going to play through it and listen along with you. Feel free to add comments if you want along the way, but I'm pretty much just going to listen to that first 7 minutes with you, and then we'll chat a little bit, and then we'll get into his reaction video. So go ahead, Andy.
Solo sex, self-love, what's the deal with it? Is it good for you or is it causing all your problems in bed? I'm Dr. Reena Malik, urologist and pelvic surgeon, and today I'm going to talk to you about the pros and cons of masturbation, and I'm going to debunk some of the biggest myths of masturbation that I hear every single day. Over 90% of men and 75% of women report masturbating on a regular basis. So that's not surprising because there's lots of benefits to masturbation. In addition to pleasure, people report improved mood, better sleep, and even more focus. And why is that? And this is not surprising because when you masturbate, you release a number of feel good hormones, including dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and even the feel good endorphins. And masturbation is the ultimate form of safe sex. It not only allows you to experience pleasure, but also allows you to familiarize yourself with what makes you excited and gives you pleasure so that you can communicate that with your partner. It also allows some people to experience pleasure without the added stress of intimacy or needing to perform under pressure. The number one myth that I hear about masturbation is that masturbation will make you go blind or have hairy palms. And this is just, in fact, not true. If almost 90% of the population is masturbating, well, then we'd have a lot of blind people and a lot of hairy palms. So basically, that is just not true. A lot of this is perpetuated by thought leaders that believe that masturbation is sinful or represents a person being out of control of their own body. And while I'm not here to judge anyone's religious convictions, these myths are just not true. The next thing is something I hear all the time. I get messages all the time asking me, I masturbate every day. Am I ruining my erections? Am I going to ruin my ability to have a normal sex life? Well, that brings me to myth number two. Masturbation does not cause erectile dysfunction. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Masturbation, when leading to orgasm, actually causes contraction of the pelvic floor muscles. And these pelvic floor muscles are super important for having orgasms and also being able to experience pleasure. So when you're actively exercising these muscles, you will have better orgasms and probably a better sex life. However, there are two caveats to this. The number one caveat is pornography. So there has been an increase in erectile dysfunction in young men, which correlates with the rise in accessibility to pornography, meaning that it's everywhere. You can't go anywhere without bumping into it if you wanted to find it. And so what does that even mean? Well, watching pornography can actually desensitize a person to normal sexual stimulation and lead to unrealistic expectations of what a sexual encounter should look like. That can also lead to a significant amount of pressure and performance anxiety, which can lead to erectile dysfunction. I get a lot of young patients who have performance anxiety and have issues with erections. And when you think about it, the stress of performing then leads to poor ability to have erections when you have sex, which then compounds that performance anxiety, and you keep going in this vicious cycle. So, actually, if you're able to masturbate and get yourself to have erections, that can actually give you some confidence so that when you are going forward with a sexual encounter, you will have the confidence to know that you are capable of getting an erection. And the next caveat is guilt. If you experience guilt from masturbation because of your personal beliefs, then that can be really detrimental to your sexual function and, in fact, has been linked to depression and anxiety. And it is totally okay to abstain from masturbation if it makes you feel bad. But if it's something that you want to work through, you may seek out a sex therapist to help you work through those issues of guilt associated with masturbation. Myth number three is that when you masturbate too much, it reduces your sensitivity. And that's not exactly true. So there's a couple things that can happen. If you're masturbating a typical normal way, then if you use a certain device or a certain motion, that your body can actually become habituated or get into a habit of feeling that particular sensation resulting in orgasm. And when you do something differently, it can make it harder for you to orgasm. So it's important to use similar techniques to what you would do in a sexual encounter, or consider using less pressure or less vibration if that's not what you're going to expect during intercourse. Also, sometimes if you are using a significant amount of pressure, stroking, or folding the penis one way or the other, this can affect the sensation of your penis or your clitoris in women. So you do need to be careful and thoughtful in how you masturbate. Number four, you can masturbate too much. And in fact, this is not true for the large majority of people. Even if you're masturbating daily for pleasure or for stress relief or enjoyment, that's okay. The times when it becomes problematic is if it's interfering with your day-to-day life. If you find that you have a strong compulsion to masturbate that you can't ignore, or you're skipping out on normal activities to masturbate, or skipping out on being intimate with your partner just to masturbate, these are signs that you may be masturbating too frequently. However, interestingly, although there's not a lot of data to support this, in some men with chronic pelvic pain or testicular pain, we will actually recommend that men masturbate a couple times a week as kind of a stress relief mechanism. It sometimes does help people with chronic pain relieve that stress. Myth number five, masturbating means that you have a bad relationship. This is not true. Many people in partnered relationships masturbate separately or together, and this is not a reflection of the amount of love your partner has for you or vice versa. This is an activity that actually may improve your sex life overall and should have no reflection on your level of intimacy or bond as a couple. And our last myth, myth number six, is that masturbation lowers testosterone. And in fact, there is no data that suggests that masturbation lowers your testosterone level. In fact, when you orgasm or during masturbation, your testosterone level actually goes up. And after you complete the orgasm, the testosterone level goes back down to a normal level. It does not actually deplete the amount of testosterone you have in your body. This myth has actually gotten a lot of traction. Even in ancient Greek and Roman times, they found that men would hold off from having sex or masturbating before big tournaments because they thought they'd be more aggressive when they were sexually frustrated. And similarly, athletes have done the same. But there's not really a lot of data to support that. So there's no reason to put yourself through that torture. Thank you so much for watching. And always remember to take care of yourself because you're worth it.
Okay, so I hope you guys could hear that okay, and I apologize if that was a little too much information for some of you. The only reason I shared that entire video is because Christopher West, who's, like it or not, sort of the face of, I guess, the Catholic theology of the body movement, responded to her video in a, well, in a Christopher West fashion, and I wanted sort of everyone to be able to hear everything she had to say before we go on to his. So I don't see any comments sitting in the chat right now. So Andy, why don't you go ahead and queue up Christopher West's video? I may stop you at some point, but let's go ahead and play his video now.
For a response to a video from Dr. Reena Malik. She's a very popular YouTuber, has a couple million subscribers. She's a urologist. She talks about sexual issues. And in this video, she's addressing some masturbation myths. And I have some things to say about this. Let's take a look.
Masturbation, solo sex, self-love. What's the deal with it? Is it good for you or is it causing all your problems in bed? I'm Dr. Reena Malik, urologist and pelvic surgeon, and today I'm going to talk to you about the pros
sorry,
and
I got to
cons.
say something about self-love here. If you really loved yourself, you would understand that your body is designed to be a gift to another. Loving yourself, in the euphemism, we just don't want to talk about what we're actually doing. That's why we call it self-love. But anyway, let's keep going.
Cons of masturbation, and I'm going to debunk some of the biggest myths of masturbation that I hear every single day. Over 90% of men and 75% of women report masturbating on a regular basis. So that's not surprising because there's lots of benefits to masturbation. In addition to pleasure, people report improved mood, better sleep, and even more focus. And why is that? And this is not surprising because when you masturbate, you release a number of feel-good hormones, including dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and even the feel-good endorphins. And masturbation is the ultimate form of safe sex. It not only allows you to experience pleasure, but also allows you to familiarize yourself with what makes you excited and gives you pleasure. So you can
Okay. With great reverence for every human being who has been in this trap. And when I was a teenager, I was not immune. So I know whereof I speak. Nonetheless, it must be said, just the whole paradigm from which she's approaching this subject is wrong from the start. And I'm telling you, it is the result of wearing what I've called condom-colored glasses, right? When we wear condom-colored glasses, the goal of sex is no longer generating the next generation. Right? When you remove fertility from the sexual equation, sexuality loses its compass and it becomes completely disoriented. The goal when you remove fertility from the sexual equation is pleasure, because that's all that's left. And when that's your paradigm, the pursuit of pleasure, well, of course, masturbation is awesome, right? Because as she says, it's the ideal safe sex. The very idea of safe sex, what is a child a threat? Is new life threatening to us? I know what it's like to bring children to this world. I have 5 of them. And yes, with the joy of being a father, there are burdens, there are sufferings, there are hardships. But if we're seeing a child as something to protect myself from, i.e., safe sex, if we're seeing sex as something that needs to be made safe because I might get a disease, we are just working from a paradigm that is so other than the paradigm of self-giving love, of losing myself for the sake of others, right? We're working from this paradigm that it's about me. Is your paradigm for sex self-focused, or is it other-focused?
Andy, why don't you stop it there? Yeah. So, this is where I think Christopher West just, he's really not listening to her, and he's really not, I don't think he's arguing this in a fair manner, because he seems to be making, say what you want about masturbation, and the church teaches what it does, but his approach to it seems entirely wrong to me. I would guess if you ask most people, they are not doing that as a substitute for true, genuine, self-giving intimacy with their spouse, or if they're not married, with someone else. He seems to have this idea that those who engage in this are choosing that over what I think all of us agree is the most desirable way to express ourselves sexually, and that's not really what happens. It's not this is this isn't really taking away from true physical intimacy. It's typically undertaken because physical intimacy isn't available, right? As Midnight says, solo is generally a side dish. I mean, I think if I make no other point, I want to make that point. Yeah, exactly. And this is something that I think is so important. So when Christopher West and others sort of trash solo or other stuff because it doesn't reflect, the fullest expression of love through the conjugal act, they act as though this is being done instead of that, when that's just, if we're just being perfectly honest and objective, that's not what happens. I doubt a single, I bet you pull any Catholic marriage, I'll bet not a single conjugal act gets, let's say, not done because one or both spouses chooses this. The alternative is abstinence, right? This is being chosen instead of abstinence. It's not being chosen instead of the conjugal act and the full expression of love. So I just think that is just, he's completely missing the point here, and I think he really undermines his position and what the church truly says about this stuff by approaching it the way he does. So anyway, go ahead and continue.
Is it focused on me and my pleasure, or is it focused on becoming a gift to another, committing myself to another, loving another, and the offspring that might result? If your paradigm is self-focused pleasure, well, then masturbation is your paradigm. If your paradigm is self-giving love, then you're going to recognize that masturbation is the antithesis of self-giving love. And masturbation will train your whole psychosexual development in the direction of pleasing myself. And then even when you get married, what you're going to be doing, if you haven't had a major change of mind, what you're going to be doing even in your marriage is you're just going to continue that masturbatory mindset, but you're going to be using somebody else's body to masturbate. Is this going to be an affirmation of the beauty and splendor and dignity and value of the other person and the value of the life that might be conceived? Or are you just going to be in it for yourself? Right? Here is the difference. Bottom line between between cat.
So here again, Christopher West cannot stay on task because then he gets into the issue of people using their spouse, using legitimate conjugal intimacy for themselves. But okay, well, what do you want? Do you want? I mean, what is more? Ask yourself, what is more selfish? Using your spouse for your own sexual gratification, even if, let's say, they don't really want to, or you don't have the right mindset, or you avoid mistreating them that way and you engage in solo. I mean, he's the one that's talking about this being selfish and self-centered. I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I do think that using your spouse, let's say forcing them or making them feel obligated to engage when they don't really want to, is using your spouse. But I fail to see how solo is selfish or is abusive towards your spouse, because you are specifically choosing not to misuse them in that way, and you're doing it yourself. And again, I'm not saying it's fine. I'm not condoning it, but I'm simply addressing the fact that his claim that it's selfish, but then using selfish conjugal intimacy to support it, doesn't make sense. I think he's being very sloppy in his argument, or he's really not even trying. So I just wanted to get that point out there. Go ahead, Andy.
Catholic teaching on sex and the secular world's teaching on sex. In the secular world's teaching on sex, the goal, the paradigm, the highest value is pleasure. In the Catholic vision of sex, the goal, the highest value, the paradigm is the dignity and value of the person. Right? If your highest value in sex is pleasure, what do other people become? People become a means to your pleasure. And if your paradigm is pleasure, and people are no longer giving you pleasure with whom you're having sex, you just discard them and go find somebody else who will give you the pleasure you want. So you end up treating people as if they are dispensable, replaceable, and repeatable.
Okay. Again, this guy, he's a one-trick pony. Is he arguing that those that engage in solo are going to become, I don't know, serial cheaters? Like, he's arguing about something completely unrelated to the topic of masturbation. So this whole idea, and here's one point that this is why I wanted to play her entire video. You will note with Christopher West and everyone like him, anytime they talk about whether it's contraception, solo, other acts, anything, they they will always say the only reason you would do that stuff is for pleasure. They never acknowledge or consider that people do it for some reason other than pleasure, because they have to demonize these other arguments. They don't even consider. And what did she say? She said, I distinctly remember her saying that one of the reasons that people do this is to release tension or whatever. I forget what she said, but tension, anxiety releasing. And she talked about the physiological benefits that come from that. He doesn't address that at all. I don't know if that's on purpose or he's just not a good listener. But what if that's people's motivations? What's his argument for why that is self-centered? And again, if it's not being directed, if you're not using your spouse for one of those motives, whether it's physical release or pleasure or whatever, and you're let's say taking care of business yourself, I don't understand how that's misusing your spouse, unless you're doing this and rejecting their legitimate request for intimacy. If that's what's going on, I totally agree with Christopher West, whatever. But I don't think that's realistically what's going on here, and he just doesn't really seem to account for that. I want to, if you want to put Jonah's comment on there about masturbation is a sign that spouse isn't properly coming um, for the other. Yeah. So I think my personal opinion is that masturbation can be, I think it's more of a sign, a symptom of, let's say, dysfunction in the sexual relationship, more so than a cause of dysfunction. I really don't think he has any compelling argument that engaging in it causes, unless, like he said, it becomes a real horrible habit, and that's a total different matter. But if you watch her video, I don't think there's any evidence that engaging this in a, let's say, prudent manner, whatever you want to call it, causes dysfunction. But I think it can, in fact, be a symptom of dysfunction, um, or it's a product of couples, having to abstain for NFP reasons or whatever. Um, but but so I don't know if Joan, if you agree with that or not, but if that's kind of your point, I agree with that. I think Christopher West is just missing the boat here. So go ahead and take that comment down, and you can continue the video, Andy.
No, 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 no. Toasters are dispensable. Your toaster breaks, you throw it away, you get another one. Toasters are replaceable. You throw the broken one away, you replace it with another one. Toasters are repeatable. There are a million of the very same model of toaster in the Amazon warehouse. But the value and dignity of a human person is such that the person is indispensable, irreplaceable, and unrepeatable.
Go ahead, Andy. Keep going.
This is why it hurts when people use us and throw us away. Doesn't that hurt? Pay attention to your pain. It's telling you something. Doesn't it hurt when people use you, throw you away, and replace you with somebody else? Oh, man, it hurts. Pay attention to your pain. It's telling you something. Doesn't it hurt when people measure you against somebody else and treat you as if you could just be shuffled around because you're the same model or there's a better model than you? That hurts. Pay attention to your pain. Your pain is telling you that you are indispensable, irreplaceable, unrepeatable. When we hold the value of the dignity of the person as the highest value here, then we subordinate pleasure to that value, the value of the person. God created sexual pleasure. What's it for? It's meant to be the joy of loving as God loves, right? But it has to be subordinate to the dignity of the person. When we flip that around and pleasure becomes the highest value, now the person is subordinate to the pleasure, right? And if you don't give me pleasure, see ya, throw you away, replace you with another model. The whole paradigm here is that masturbatory, it's about me, pleasure the highest value. Sorry for my launch right at the start of the video, but it had to be said. Okay. Let's keep watching.
Communicate that with your partner.
Okay, again, do you see what Christopher West is doing there? He, again, focuses entirely on pleasure, and all of the arguments he made about, how it hurts to be discarded and trashed and all that is perfectly legitimate argument if the topic was contraception or adultery or open relationships. Like, that's all perfectly valid arguments against that. None of those are arguments against masturbation, but that's all he's got. Like, he's truly a one-trick pony. And I'm not saying that there aren't arguments against masturbation, legitimate moral arguments. but he doesn't really make any of them. He doesn't have a coherent argument against masturbation, at least. So um Jonah, Andy is my remote assistant, so that's all you need to know. All right, go ahead, continue on.
It also allows some people to experience pleasure without the added stress of intimacy or needing to perform under pressure. And the next
The
caveat
added
is
stress of intimacy. The added stress of intimacy. What is sexual pleasure without the beauty of intimacy? I maybe, I mean, if I'm being as generous as possible, is intimacy stressful? It's painful at times. It's a challenge. It ain't easy. It means making yourself utterly vulnerable and naked to the other person. But isn't that what sex is supposed to be?
Okay, Christopher West. I don't think he's really being fair about the point that she's making there. To give you some examples, and this happens in good Catholic marriages too. I was just listening to a podcast the other day. What if one spouse has cheated, or one spouse has a terrible pornography habit, right? I know, in hearing from other people that can be very, very painful, and being intimate with that person can be very stressful. I think that's what she's talking about. I think she's talking about and it may not even be something that traumatic. It could be, the stresses of NFP, the fear of getting pregnant, or whatever the case may be. So I think I think his heart is in the right place. I think he is. I get what he's trying to say, but I think unwittingly, he is really, I would say, being too dismissive of people, men and women, who, because of circumstances in life or struggles or things the other spouse has done, could absolutely find full, complete intimacy extremely painful and anxiety ridden. Now, that doesn't mean that you turn to solo, but I think his argument against that is really not very fair. I don't think he's really considering that. So go ahead, Andy.
To be. As a married man for decades now, I can say with certainty that sex calls me to be so naked, so vulnerable, so intimate with my wife. The only way I can be that naked and vulnerable is if this woman has pledged before God and the whole human race, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you.
Okay.
When our paradigm is fear of
Again, I don't know what he's arguing about. Like, what does any of this have to do with solo? Nothing he's talking about. The fear that you have to be vulnerable to engage in the conjugal act. You have to know that your partner, your spouse, isn't going to leave you. Yeah, that's all true, but it has nothing to do with the topic at hand, which is masturbation. It seems like what he's trying to do, I think it's sort of a very roundabout way, is kind of lump those that engage or struggle with this type of activity with the adulterers and the porn addicts and the truly rotten scoundrels some people find themselves married to, when in fact that's just not what's going on. That's just not what's going on. He completely goes off on these tangents and says things that are, I guess, true in some respect, but are completely irrelevant to the topic he says he's responding to, which is this video about masturbation. So, yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Intimacy, or if intimacy is just stressful, but I still want that pleasure, the paradigm obviously is masturbatory. And when the paradigm is masturbatory, you're creating an inability even to enter true intimacy, right? Intimacy. Is there real nakedness going on in the spiritual sense where we're opening our hearts and saying, into me, see? Masturbation can never, ever teach you that. And you come to think of it as stressful. Well, if you're not interested in intimacy and all you want is pleasure, well, go for it. Just keep masturbating. And I guess that's your point. Anyway, here we go.
Guilt. If you experience guilt from
All right,
masturbation because of your personal beliefs, then that can be really detrimental.
Okay, sorry. Again, he continues to act as though masturbation is being used as a substitute for conjugal intimacy and to avoid it. And maybe in some situations it is, but I have yet to meet anyone who says they prefer solo to good, wholesome intimacy with their spouse. That's just never the choice people make. People do this, rightly or wrongly, because they can't do that with their spouse. And he just doesn't even account for that at all. So, okay, go ahead, Andy.
To your sexual function, and in fact has been linked to depression and anxiety.
Hold on. If you're experiencing guilt from doing something you shouldn't be doing, that is the proper response. I'm not saying some crushing guilt like you're no longer worthy of being a human person. I'm not saying you are forever doomed with no hope of redemption. There's always hope of redemption. Guilt when we do something we shouldn't do is the proper response. If you are feeling guilty for having done something, pay attention to that feeling. Maybe it's a recognition, like you put your hand on a stove and it hurts and you take your hand off. Maybe guilt is a similar kind of pain. Maybe you shouldn't be doing that. That's another way to look at it.
It is totally okay to abstain from masturbation if it makes you feel bad. But if it's something that you want to work through, you may seek out a sex therapist to help you work through those issues of guilt associated with masturbation. Myth number 5, masturbating means that you have a bad relationship. This is not true. Many people in partnered relationships masturbate separately or together. And this is not a reflection of the amount of love your partner has for you.
We've
or
already
vice
talked
versa.
here, but I can't help but commenting here. I can't let this fly. Masturbation is a different paradigm, right? It's a utilitarian paradigm. The paradigm is about me and my pleasure. When that's your paradigm in the marriage bed, truly, you don't really know how to become a gift to the other. Right? The opposite of love is not hatred here. The opposite of love is using another as a means to an end. And it becomes sheer egoism when that end is just your pleasure. That's how masturbation will train you. So I have to firmly disagree with her here and say, if you are caught in the habit of masturbation, you are crippling yourself in your ability to love. Masturbation will train you in the exact opposite of love because it trains you in a utilitarian approach to sex itself. And when you have a utilitarian mindset, that is the exact.
Okay, I agree with I agree with Christopher West's point, but not his reasoning. I don't think it's because it's utilitarian. Utilitarianism is using someone else for your own interest, right? Using yourself for your own interest is not utilitarianism. I don't know what he's even trying to argue here. Again, he keeps flipping into these arguments that I think are better fits for the question of contraception, or someone who is trying to get their spouse to do things they are just completely uncomfortable with or feel morally opposed to, whatever. But the utilitarian argument just doesn't apply to solo activity. And now I want to, the part that I agree with him, and even she agreed, although he really didn't acknowledge it, that it can absolutely become a problem if it becomes sort of obsessive, or you if you train your body, if your body gets used to that type of self stimulation, then absolutely that's a risk, that's a hazard to yourself and to your intimate life. That's something she acknowledges, and I think that's more or less what he's saying. But he comes at it, I think, from a tries to come at it from a moral perspective, when I think on a more practical level that's true. And that's why uh, absolutely it's something that needs to be considered from a prudential standpoint. I want to go back to his comment about the guilt, though, because this, and he was saying earlier, listen to your pain. Your pain is telling you something. Well, okay. Well, what about the pain that people feel from extended abstinence? That pain is real, but he never addresses that. You're supposed to ignore that pain. You're supposed to ignore the pain that goes from, goes with extended abstinence or whatever. So he's inconsistent. He's inconsistent about that. Um, and so anyway, I think I think he's I don't think he's giving her recognition where she's making a fair point that you don't have to get into a moral question about whether it can become a bad habit and train, create bad habits in relationships. That's all true. But um, again, put Jonah's comment up there for me, the last one. So Jonah says, I think it's utilitarian in the sense that it's being used as release or to get by, and not as a means of sharing it with your spouse as it's meant to be. Again, Jonah, you're making the same mistake that Christopher West does, that says, well, this is being used as a substitute for conjugal intimacy. And I know, Jonah, you and I are going to disagree with about that. You're like, well, go ahead and do it. If you get pregnant, so be it, even if it jeopardizes your spouse's wife. I'm just not that flippant about that. I just think you can't. We should not be that flippant about this, especially from the perspective of our wives who actually have to go through pregnancy and childbirth and nursing and all that. I really disagree with you, Jonah, when it comes to that. And so it's simply not. You are not choosing that over intimacy with your spouse. When it happens because intimacy isn't or can't happen for one reason or another. And that's something that Christopher West will never, ever seem to acknowledge. So go ahead, Andy.
Exact opposite of
All right, Andy. I think let's go ahead and wrap it up. I think the connection might be on Andy's end. That's kind
I'm
of all I
sorry.
really.
I'm sorry. That is not freedom. That leads to addiction. A person who cannot.
Again, I totally agree with. I mean, you know, whether it's addictive, it can be addictive. that's absolutely true. I know from hearing from people, from guys especially, that it can be very addictive, especially when it's associated with porn. There's no question about that. And I don't think that the doctor disagrees with that. But that's that's a fine practical prudential argument. It's not really a moral argument. And all he has is moral arguments, right? Um so I just think that's the part of the video. That's most of his video. You can watch the rest of it if we can. Andy, when we're done, let's go ahead and add links to both of those videos in the description for anyone that wants to go check them out themselves. um, I got a few minutes here if anyone has any comments that they anything they wanted to say um, before we wrap it up. I know we've been going for a while, but I hope you enjoyed this. This is a um, new challenge for us. We're doing this. I'm doing this remote. Andy's doing it from the other side of the world, and I think it went pretty good. But that's why we got a late start today. Um, yeah, I mean, here's. Go ahead and put Midnight's comment up on the board for me, please. The last one. So I think I think there are plenty of um, reasonable arguments for why it can be dangerous to engage in solo, and especially for young people. I think for teenagers and whatever, I think it can really become a problem. But I think the majority of this audience is going to be married people, Catholic married people, um, people that are in a relationship, are trying, and especially for those of us that are not using contraception because we for one reason or another, the church says it or we have other reasons for it. um i just think I just think we need to be fair, be more fair than Christopher West is being fair about just the context in which it happens, irrespective of the moral arguments. At least be honest about how and why it's happening, because I don't think Christopher West is being honest about how and why it happens. I think he goes to these extremes. He creates these straw man arguments to kind of ram through his kind of, for him, the only tool in the toolbox is a hammer. So every problem has to be a nail, and I just think he's not really willing or, you know, trying to be, nuanced and fair about it. And I think we should just be more honest, honest about where we're coming from. And I think he didn't really address most of the stuff that she said in there. Um, I think for folks like Christopher West, and I know we talked about this in kind of greater detail. It was at episode 250 where we talked about how the church in the catechism, and then I forget the document that the catechism section 2352 is built on, but basically says, yeah, our rule isn't going to change no matter how much science or biology tells us we're crazy. That's not what they said, but that's kind of the spirit of it. And he's kind of the same thing. Like, I think he's very, very, I think he feels like he has to take an offensive attack against sort of non-religious kind of scientific approaches to this. And I think as Catholics we ought to be able to acknowledge and stay in our lane and say, well, we this is what we believe, this is our moral reason for it, and um, somehow recognize it or acknowledge that some of the things that have been taught over time, that you're going to grow hairy palms or go blind or whatever the case may be. Those are the kinds of nonsense things that have been spread over time. falsely to fear people, um, to scare people into doing, what we say. And I think we need to stop doing that. So I think we need to just make, um, I think we need to make, just be more humble and fair in how we sort of assess other arguments, and especially people are coming from a non-moral perspective. Midnight, thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I kind of threw it together. I listened to it once before, and then of course I had a chance uh, to listen to it again on the car. But this being able to live stream this way uh, really frees up my ability to do some of these things, because I have regular trips in the vehicle of 40 minutes that I'd love to do these things if you guys want to do more. So, yeah, if you have more things, send them to me in the Discord or DM me on Twitter or whatever. I love to kind of lead these kinds of discussions, because I think they're really necessary, because I think nothing against Christopher West and the mission he's trying to accomplish. I think he's trying to do some good things, but I think we need to just take it down, tone it down a level, and just be a little more pragmatic and humble about how we approach these things. So that's all I wanted to say. Um, I've got about 30 minutes. I'm sitting outside the gym. I'm going to go work on this body for Mrs. Onan's benefit. So I'm gonna let you guys have the last couple of comments here, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Yeah, if you could resend that to me, picking that Esther Pearl. I know you've been sending them to me. Um, Make sure I have the right one. I have listened to some of them, and she has some really interesting content. So make sure I don't forget. I should be able to do more of these during the week. If you guys want these kinds of conversations, I'm more than happy to set these up and contribute whatever I can and let you guys share in the comments. So I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I appreciate you guys who were very, very active in the comments. I love these kinds of conversations and the community we have here. Even you, Jonah, appreciate you showing up and doing your best to represent the Christopher West fans of the world. We know you're his biggest fan. Yeah, maybe we'll get John on next time. He'd be fun to chat with. So maybe I'll send him a message next time. Maybe I'll react to one of John's reactions to Christopher West. Maybe that'd be fun. Maybe we'll do that next time. So, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. So Andy, if you want to go ahead and wrap up the live stream, we'll do this next time.